Good morning. I see a few familiar faces. Sorry, I'm feeling only at about 80% this morning, so if I fall over, someone catch me. As Leslie said, I am a professional planner. I work in the Community Development Division within Commerce, and I'm the Planning Bureau Chief for that division. So my role as Planning Bureau Chief wear a lot of different hats, but one of those hats is to manage the Community Technical Assistance Program, which some of you may be aware of. It's commonly referenced throughout the state as CTAP. So I'll be talking a little bit about the resources we have at CTAP in relation to the overall resources that planners use with GIS. So today, one of the things I kind of wanted to focus on was to first talk about planning and its relationship with geographic information systems, how GIS is utilized, how it can be utilized, just to get a sense, since I don't know the majority of you in here, how many of you are planners? Okay, 1.5. Okay.
I'm planning on going to lunch.
Okay, there's a lot of similarities. So, and the rest of you, how many work for the state government? Okay, what departments?
Vital stats.
Vital stats, okay. Anybody?
No. DPHHS.
Okay.
Revenue. Military affairs.
Okay,
Revenue.
great.
Trust lands.
Okay, all right. And local governments? I know where you work, Laura. So, you know, planning in the state of Montana often, I don't want to say it's a bad rap, but when people say, what do you do? And I respond, well, I'm a planner. They often say, oh, what do you plan for? Do you plan parties? Do you plan weddings? The people that do know about the profession understand to a certain degree, but oftentimes relate planning to subdivision review, which is one of the many facets of planning in the state, but it is certainly not the only facet of the profession. And as a planner, there are various different levels within the planning field and focuses. Not every planner knows GIS, not every planner utilizes GIS. The training and experience I've had did require that I learn and utilize GIS. But one of the things I'd like to cover today and maybe introduce you all to is the overlaps between the planning profession and GIS professionals, the use of data, how we utilize it, take it, convey it to the constituents that we serve at various levels of local, state, and federal government, and how that may in some ways overlap with some of the roles that you have in state or local government. So it might be pretty high level. It might be fairly basic for those of you who have a general understanding of GIS. How many use ArcView software? Okay, great. So looking through the agenda, a lot of the information that you've probably heard about over these last few days, you're already well versed and familiar with a lot of the resources and the programs. So in that way, this might just be a general overview. But what my focus is going to be is how we as planners use those programs to inform the work that we do and how that relates. So first, I wanted to basically just provide a overview of the planning profession. Planning as defined by the American Planning Association, otherwise known as APA, it's really geared at improving the welfare of people's lives. It's not just subdivision review, but it's focused towards planning at the local or the state or often the regional or federal level, planning for a vision of what communities and constituents want to see in their communities, within the region, within certain aspects or facets of their community. So it might be focused towards transportation or health or growth and development. But planners generally work on some level with local governments. Even if you're in the private sector, a lot of planners do work in private development. And even with that focus, they still interact on a daily basis or frequently with local governments because there's a series of processes that even private planning staff have to go through in order to follow local guidelines and implement their visions and their development plans. So oftentimes planners work with elected officials as well as community members. They're civic-minded, and you'll notice the words that I've sort of highlighted and underlined are kind of the key components of high level what the planning profession conveys. So you'll see in a minute where, at least I think, the overlap between planning and GIS occurs. GIS obviously is a system of providing information. It's hardware, software, and data for manipulating, capturing, visioning, analyzing, and managing that data. And so in a lot of ways, geographic information systems provide the basic tools for planners to work with in accomplishing their goals and developing visions for their communities and their constituents. But what I really want to highlight is that from a planning perspective, GIS is the tool that helps us visualize a lot of the key concepts. And when we're talking about policy, making policy and determining steps forward, GIS can really be sort of the visual tool to take that text and make it, communicate it better with the communities and the constituents that we work with. So, gosh, for a second that looked green. So the intersection between the planning field and the GIS field is really the bones and then the procedure and the processes that planners enact. And obviously, most of you in this room are well aware of the types of data available in GIS. The probably number one source of data that we use is related to population. Population statistics are sort of the very basic building block for anything planning related. Who you're planning for, how they're growing, if they're growing, where they're growing, why, kind of informs all of the other discussions and decisions that we make. But there's also various forms of data related to public services, response times, utilities, types of housing, types of businesses, the demographics of the population, obviously land use, transportation, accessibility, environment. And that data is in turn conveyed through planning efforts and documents in this state, primarily through the growth policy. And I'm going to talk a little bit and show you some examples of how we work with this data through the growth policy. But in addition to, I guess, let me back up. Does everybody know, are you familiar with the growth policies? You don't have to answer, Laura. The statutory requirement in state law. Do you know what a growth policy is? Okay. Growth policies in Montana are sort of seen as the penultimate planning tool. They're a requirement of local governments, cities and counties, if those local governments would like to implement certain regulatory measures like zoning, you have to have a growth policy in place. Beyond that, they're not technically required, but most cities and counties throughout the state do have a growth policy or development plan in place to guide basic growth decisions that are made at the local level. It sets you up for a variety of things. It was the growth policy statute, which was, I won't get into that, but basically growth policies are a really positive planning tool because they, again, set the vision and they establish for policymakers how those jurisdictions are going to grow moving forward. So they're sort of the base map, or I should say they serve as the umbrella, underneath which you get your regulations, zoning I mentioned, subdivision regulations are related to the growth policy, if you have annexation policies for your city, where you're going to annex and why, and the services you're going to provide, that should be based on the growth policy again, because it's informing those decisions. Growth policies often have subplans and studies at the regional scale, because our counties here in Montana are quite large, and so a growth policy for Flathead or for Yellowstone County encompasses a much larger area, in some cases the size of Rhode Island, and requires some subplanning. They can also form the basis for transportation plans, for capital improvements plans, and also inform kind of the nitty-gritty if a city or a county has design standards that they'd prefer local governments to follow. This is going to be really hard to see now that I'm seeing the size of the screen. So, and will these all be online?
Yeah, we'll put them
Great.
on the website so you guys can add them.
Perfect. This is actually, it's a really informative table, and it sort of illustrates the ways in which data can be used through these different types of planning tools at the local level. So I'll just take a couple examples here. Data related to transportation. The three categories across the top, there's the application of simple inventory, then there's the analysis aspect of the data, and then the final decision making or the policy making application. So taking transportation on its face, you can use data to visualize or convey sanitation truck routes. You can pinpoint locations of landfills. You know, at the very basic level, that data can help you visualize what exists on the ground. From there, you can go through an analysis of the existing and potential capacity and the strain due to potential growth and development. So you can take the existing landfills, you can look at their capacity, you can look at the routes and the staff required to man those routes, and utilizing different data for complete an analysis to kind of determine where the highest need is related to growth. If this landfill is at much higher capacity or close to capacity, perhaps approving additional growth in that area or that region might not be the best idea unless in turn you're planning to expand that resource or expand additional transportation routes. And so that in turn affects the policy decisions that may be conveyed through your growth policy or your capital improvements planning document, where the local government would say, you know, for this area, we're almost at capacity for this landfill. We don't have the funding to expand that within the next 5 or 10 years. So growth should be directed towards this area of the city instead, where the capacity of the landfill is maybe only 50%, and we're better able to provide the services. So there's a number of other examples: housing stock, human services, law enforcement can provide an inventory of police stations, availability of officers. You can analyze the frequency of crime and look at crime rates in relation to the number of officers that may be available in a particular area and make policy decisions on that. So through the planning process, we tend to take the data that's available, go through that analysis, and in turn come up with policies that the local government then decides what will best suit the needs of the community based on their priorities and vision. So, as I mentioned earlier, statute doesn't require that every city and county adopt a growth policy, but if they choose to, there are certain requirements that the growth policy address. And so under statute, communities that adopt a growth policy must address through maps and text existing conditions. And those existing conditions are typically population, housing, the economic base, transportation, sand and gravel resources, the environment, you have to address all of those. To what extent is up to the local governing body. But it does specifically require maps and text. Now, over the years, most communities tend to focus more on the text as the basis for the growth policy development. It's really easy to throw data up in a table, to talk about it throughout basically a report, and your policies are developed, and obviously they're text. But what's important and what we're trying to move communities towards is taking the text and illustrating the data that's implied through maps, because maps are a quicker and easier way to show communities what the policies that they're deciding upon are actually going to do and how they're going to impact the local level. So very basically, we know this would be an example of data inventory in a growth policy that's being developed for Stanford. Actually, right now, they took and looked at what the existing land use is. So this would be an example of, based on the CAMA data and the information available at the state level, what the parcel data for the city of Stanford is, what types of land uses based on the tax value are presently in Stanford. So this is just an example of an illustrative map inventorying land use. But when we move into the nuts and bolts of a growth policy, you have goals and policies. This one is an example from the Flathead County Growth Policy, which I worked on before coming to the state. And you'll see that when you read at face value, this goal is to support land use policies ensuring adequate quality and quantity of sand and gravel to meet the current and future demands in Flathead County. If that's your goal, what does that actually mean? And if you're the average citizen, you're going to read that and say, wow, that's all well and good, but I don't really know how that affects me, and I'm not sure if it's a good or a bad thing, and I couldn't even begin to tell you the first thing about whether we have adequate quality and quantity of sand and gravel resources. So what the map does in this situation is illustrate the existing location of gravel resources in Flathead County currently. It also illustrates the types of superficial soils with using data from the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology, and it overlays the water resources because certain soil types are more prevalent, have more prevalent sand and gravel resources. And as you can kind of see from the small map up here, a lot of the sand and gravel resources in Flathead County are concentrated in more of the soils that are closest to the Flathead River and kind of in the floodplain. And so being able to illustrate through mapping and through the data what the goal and what the intent of the growth policy really is helpful to convey information to people that might not automatically understand what those resources are, where they're located, and how they relate to different resources like soils and hydrology. Madison County has a fantastic growth policy that was just updated in 2012, and they completed a number of maps that are pretty phenomenal sources of data. So I'm going to go through two objectives that they have within their growth policy. It's actually two objectives within the same statement. One is to locate development in areas that are physically suitable for development. And what does that mean at face value in text? It can mean a lot of things. So what they did is illustrate suitability based on a number of factors, one of which was looking at their wildland-urban interface. And this basically conveys where certain development types or any development would be less preferable based on the likelihood that there might be environmental concerns, wildfires. You're getting into the wildland interface where you have additional concerns with wildlife and environmental restrictions. So this was layered with a number of other factors, including what we'll see next, which deals more with access, but is also suitability for the type of development. So when we want to locate development in areas that are easily accessed by public services, we can better illustrate that through an analysis that looks at response time as well as distance from services and road maintenance. So in this map, what they're showing are the roads in green highlighted are actually not maintained by the county during the winter. So when you're going to have limited access for a pretty large portion of the year, it might make you think twice about locating a large development or directing development in those areas because you're going to have very restricted accessibility. Additionally, ArcGIS can complete an analysis for response times and response rates. Again, if you have a fire and your house is burning down, a 45-minute response time is probably not going to be acceptable as far as, but a lot of counties, Flathead, Madison included, they use this data not only to determine their policies, but also just to make citizens aware. For many counties in Montana, they don't restrict growth through zoning or land use controls. And so in a lot of ways, the level of risk a homeowner or property owner is willing to take on is their own decision. So it's important through the growth policy document to provide community members with the information to make those decisions. They might still choose to locate further away from services and recognize that the response time is going to be reduced. But they have been given the tools and the information to make that decision, and the county in turn can make policy decisions that limit the cost in providing those services. Excuse me. Billings, I'm going to move on to a different example out of growth policies into some of those sub-planning efforts. So the city of Billings has a great annexation policy. It was recently adopted?
We're in the process right now to update it.
Okay. And with the annexation policies, a requirement in statute that there's a provision of services plan that goes with that annexation policy. And a lot of those plans tend to be all text-based. But what Billings does is actually have a plan that looks like this, that shows the limits of annexation. And I don't think this is the one that's in process right now,
No,
is it?
that's-
The old one?
Yeah.
Okay. And so this visual is showing the prioritization that the city of Billings has in annexing property over the next short term, 2 years, and then the long term, which I believe is 10 years. So the areas in red are the short-term priorities. Individuals who choose or request to be annexed in those areas would be considered.
We would have services to be able to do that
Quickly, as opposed to the orange areas, which are further away from those services and would require much longer term planning and additional cost to the city. I'm just going to take a quick drink. So similarly, because in a lot of ways zoning and annexation go hand in hand, particularly when we're talking about municipalities and municipal planning. The city of Kalispell, within their growth policy, has a policy that's intended to encourage urban growth in areas which are not environmentally sensitive or productive agricultural lands. Well, that policy is really hard to convey, again, without a visual aid to show what those areas are that are environmentally sensitive and what type of urban growth we want to keep away from those areas. So this map, which is actually their zoning and floodplain map, which is based on that policy, shows the existing floodplain in blue is 100-year and the grayish is 500-year. And you can see from the map that the higher density zoning areas, which are these pinks and peaches, are kept outside and away from the floodplain and generally more towards the urban core. The lower density residential uses, you'll see some of the yellow that abuts that 500-year floodplain, but generally those densities are 1 residence per acre and would be assumed to have developable area outside the floodplain on a property. So beyond just the physical documents and beyond the planning processes themselves, there's other opportunities for data and for GIS to be utilized through public workshops and meetings, trainings, and design charrettes primarily. The public forum is a good place to utilize not only these visual mapping documents, but also a couple of tools that I'm going to talk about here. Unfortunately, we didn't have time enough today to really go through a community viz example, and as I was putting this together, realized that I have to update my community viz license on my computer, so it would have been a moot point anyway. But and I know Ken knows about community viz in the back. Ken trained me in it about 6 years ago. But is anyone else familiar with community viz as a tool? Somewhat? Great. So what community viz does generally is provide, well, it provides a wide range of tools and services that planners and GIS professionals can use to conduct really in-depth analysis. But what I found it most useful for in my line of work is completing relatively basic analyses in the public forum to walk communities through certain decisions that may or may not be made and what the implications are. So at the very basic level, what community does is it's built off of the ArcView platform. It's almost like an add-on. You're going to see a very similar desktop that you would if you opened up ArcMap or ArcViewer. And the data that you're going to import will be similar, but what Community Viz allows you to do is make some assumptions for that data. For instance, in this case, I think it will allow us to explore here. And this is, when I go back to the presentation, and you'll have this online, so you can connect directly to the Placeways website and look at these examples and run through them interactively as well. But what this example is looking at is a community, and it's assessing the development build-out using certain assumptions, which are fuel efficiency, the number of trips per household per day, the number of school children, and a general overview of time lapse, essentially. And Community Viz as a program allows you to input these assumptions to be specific to your community and then change the importance of the assumptions as well as the numeric value of the assumptions. So this example is looking primarily at the numeric value of the assumptions, but in examples I've used in the past, I've utilized more the importance of certain data. For instance, if you're hoping to direct development, specific development towards areas of your community that, using Madison County as an example, that have less than 15-minute response time for fire and law enforcement, that are close to an elementary school, let's say within a mile, that are within 5 miles of a high school, and that are within 5 minutes of a grocery store. You can build all of those assumptions in to the community viz model. And what that model will then do is spit out a map that shows and prioritizes by parcel or whatever shapefile layer you select. It'll prioritize those locations so the community can get a sense of, well, what if our preferences change? What if we want a 5-minute response rate from the fire and emergency services, but we're okay with being 5 miles from an elementary school? You can change those assumptions interactively with these slide bars, and the output will change almost automatically within that public forum. So what I found this really helpful for is within those community meetings and workshops where you're sitting down with folks and having those discussions to determine their priorities, particularly in the growth policy or the capital improvements planning process. It's a pretty slick tool. It's also, like ArcView software, it's very easy to forget how to use if you don't use it on a daily basis. But Placeways, when you visit the website, they have a number of different statewide and regional training opportunities. They have a number of different examples. Another cool option that you have through the software is to actually create 3D models and do fly-throughs, which again is a very good tool for a visioning process with a community to help them understand what a certain scenario or what a certain build-out would look like. So I haven't done this myself, but I know a couple communities that have utilized this to develop design standards for their downtown business district or their downtown core. And you can input data from Google Earth, SketchUp, number of different programs, I believe AutoCAD as well, so you can mesh those programs together and input certain design characteristics through SketchUp or AutoCAD to say, well, what if we did design standards that limited building height along these streets to 3 stories? Or what if we did 5 stories? What's that scale going to look like? What are certain design facets going to look like? And obviously helps communities get a sense of what decisions they're making when they write that into their code or into their policy. Another tool that I have just learned about within this past year, and so I really think this is going to be useful moving forward, and I'm not sure, Leslie, if anybody's talked about the ArcGIS for local government over the course of the last couple of days. So what this is it's basically a free, there's a series of free applications that if you have ArcGIS software, you can download as a professional and use through ArcView desktop, but it also has an online function for municipalities that, it's easier for me to explain through. Let me just show you. Dependent on what types of data have been uploaded online, and so this is a question that might come up with the online mapping data and resources for the state of Montana. But let's do, here we go. Okay. So what communities, or what the state, for instance, could do with the data that's available is upload it becomes part of the cloud, if you will, and it's accessible by local governments and people who might not have access to ArcView, to the desktop version, similar to the online mapping tool through GIS. And it's a way to share information for local governments and the public. This example is for Naperville, Illinois, and it's showing the current construction project specific to the community. So you can, if I'm a citizen and I am interested in knowing what the racket is down the street, I can go onto this web service and say, well, you know, this giant orange blob is a sidewalk rehabilitation project for this entire area. And it's able to more easily and efficiently share information for communities. One of the other examples that I found really interesting when I was first introduced to this software, you have a park and recreation finder. So here again, if maybe you're a homeowner or you're looking at selling or buying a new house, you can go into the park and recreation finder and actually search by address or location or an area and find out the number of parks and recreation opportunities within a certain distance to you. You can also they have an addressing application, so if there are any changes to addressing that occur, citizens can go in and make sure their information is accurate so that local emergency services have the most up-to-date information to provide services and to access the property. And there was one more here. Got polling places. I believe it was this tool. This is really a neat feature similar to the public information. No, this isn't going to do it. But there's one tool that allows local governments to provide information on public hearings, for instance, for subdivision or zoning or land use application requests that come into a city or a county. That geographic information can be placed online, and citizens interested in finding out information on a subdivision proposal, when the public meeting is, provide public comment online if they're unable to attend the public meeting. And it can all be recorded and provided to the local government through an output feature. So it's kind of the next wave, which here in Montana we tend to be about 40 years behind everybody else when it comes to land use planning. So we'll talk again in 39 years and see if any local governments are using this. But it really is a resource that I think larger communities are beginning to use, certainly along the East Coast, Midwest, and Illinois, and Ohio, where I grew up. It's a resource that I think is going to make a very big difference. So how many of you were in the online mapping workshop yesterday morning? Okay. So just for those of you who were in that workshop, you already know this, but ArcGIS is moving to an online platform that allows a lot of different mapping capabilities similar to what you would have with the desktop ArcView software to be available online, again, for people who don't want to pay for the very expensive license for a desktop mapping software. So this is the web location. There is eventually a cost to this software. You get a 30-day free trial to manipulate data. And after that, there's a cost of, I believe it's $2,500 for 5 seats. And
Yeah, and 2,500 credits, so it
yes,
varies on how much you're going to use it, how many people.
right. And yeah,
Just a question.
Yeah.
So the 2,500, that covers ArcView, the full ArcView Plus? No.
No,
No.
just online.
just online.
And RQ would be separate and more.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I'd say it's a racket, but it's.
But so is Word.
But right, exactly.
So-
It's the same. It's the same. We're all in the same racket together, and in a lot of ways, this is more useful information than Word. So, but you are able to access and view maps without paying for the license that are pre-made and the existing data. So there's a certain level of functionality that's available even if you don't have, if you haven't paid the $2,500 to use to further manipulate. Obviously, you've all been sitting in this room for the last day and a half, and so you heard about the new Census and Economic Information Center's website, all of the changes, the tools that are available to you on that. Is one of what I'm kind of highlighting. Obviously, there's about 1 million different resources and locations to find data on the interweb these days, but these are kind of the tools and the locations that I go to most often. Obviously, being a state employee and having CEIC right downstairs, the resources that they have are accessible. They're accessible and they're extensive. They have access to ACS data, the data sets for the population projections, which Joe talked to you about yesterday, I believe, that are fantastic. They have a variety of maps readily made. They also have the interoperability with being able to manipulate and kind of make your own maps as well. The economic dashboard, a variety of reports, existing presentations that they've done, webinars that are always available, including this one, I believe.
Yes.
And then the technical support, so you can always call Leslie.
Or Joe.
Or Joe, or Mary. If you have questions or need assistance making a map, they're able to do that, which is really fantastic for a lot of the communities throughout the state that don't have access to ArcGIS software or need a particular map for a particular reason. The state library has the new Geographic spatial data infrastructure website. Obviously, how many of you are familiar with CAMA data? And yeah. So for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with what's out there in CAMA, the state's website basically provides a portal to a lot of different information sources: NRIS, USGS, soils data, water, hydrology. All the data can be searched for, and then there's the GIS portal that will get you to other resources. But where was I? Can all see my internet skills. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with this site, this is a pretty cool tool that utilizes the data that's available throughout the state, specifically related to property. So I'll just show you real quick how you can search for property information. This is the house I just bought. Very exciting. But it provides a ton of information on parcel data as well as other resources, tax assessment information, market info. So it's really kind of the go-to data source I found for a lot of mapping capabilities when you're talking about parcel data. All of the CAMA data can be merged with parcel layers available through the state for your particular city or county, so you can get all of this information on a parcel for your respective community, city, town, county, and merge the data to be more informative.
That's what I used before I bought my house.
Yeah, exactly. And it's useful for all sorts of things. Find out who your neighbors are. One thing I will point out, because in sitting through the workshop yesterday and learning about all the new functionalities with the online GIS resources, the Montana State Library has resources available to communities that need technical assistance to utilize some of those online data resources. I, for one, know there are probably more than a handful of communities out there that don't realize the tools are available to them, and even if they did, would probably have a really hard time navigating a lot of the functionalities in that online GIS, because it takes a lot of the same knowledge of desktop GIS or ArcView software to kind of navigate and change and manipulate the data. So Erin Fashway told me that I could put her email address up on this presentation. She's a programmer and analyst over at the State Library, and was certainly willing to provide technical assistance over the phone, and I believe they do workshop trainings as well, if requested, for local governments.
And they do like data requests, which is similar to what CEIC does. So
Okay.
Erin and I work a lot together with the same kind of helping people, which is
Right. CTAP, our program, we have mapping capabilities. Obviously, the data requests and the information requests or technical assistance with operability of ArcView software, I would likely send you to Leslie or to Erin for assistance, because they're the pros and I just kind of work my way through things. But we can create maps for you. Similar to CEIC, we also have a large format plotter and do a lot of plotting of maps for communities that don't have those resources but need them for public meetings or integrated into growth policy documents and that sort of thing. And all of CTAP's assistance is free to the public upon request. So we can be utilized for those types of projects. The other thing is we have community viz capabilities, and once I renew my license. So from an analysis standpoint and to do some of those prioritization kind of walkthroughs for communities interested in that, we have the capacity to do so. And I won't belabor the point. Obviously, you all have heard of and are probably very familiar with the American Community Survey and Census information available for the state through CEIC, but then if we're going beyond the state of Montana for any particular reason, the ACS website is sometimes user-friendly, but it does allow, it has a number of search functions and the ability to download just a ton of data and shapefiles for you to use for planners to use in their daily work, and you as well. So that's sort of my overview. I apologize for only being at 80% today, but if you have any questions or want some additional information, again, CTAP's always available to help, and I certainly hope you can reference this PowerPoint and some of the links and the resources available to you over time.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You're at the state level for planning.
Yes.
I'm over in Flathead County, where you used to be, but
Yeah.
they have their planning department. So how do you coordinate with other counties' planning departments, or are you there for the counties that don't have those resources?
We're there for both. Typically, the larger communities like, Flathead County has a pretty large planning department, respectively. Missoula's and Bozeman's and Billings. Generally, have the resources available and we don't see the need or the request for assistance as much as we do from some of the more rural communities that don't have the technical expertise or the staff to assist. But primarily what CTAP is for is to provide guidance and assistance, not necessarily to do the work. For instance, I can walk people through what a growth policy is, what it should encompass, review existing documents, but I can't actually prepare a growth policy or subdivision regulations or zoning code or review subdivision, that type of thing for communities. So there's another question I thought. Yeah, I can.
I just had a clarification on the question on Vectors Online.
Yeah.
With 10.2, all named users got a free account, one account.
Okay.
So if you buy a subscription, it's a 5C account for $2,500, but you're probably smarter. If you have an ELA, an enterprise license agreement, which the state does, and most large counties do, it's bundled with that. You won't get an email, but we got ours last week. So we have, I think, 2 named users on 2 different licenses: individual ARC and basic, and ARC advanced. And we each got an extra person added onto our account. So it's
Yeah, if you have an ELA, which the state does and maybe some of the local people do too, they don't give you the free one like Kim was saying, but they give you like 1 free account for that whole ELA. That makes any sense. So your questions about that beg me or Kim.
Yes.
I guess.
Yeah.
It gets confusing.
So you're better off buying, like, if you don't have it, you're probably better off buying ArcView if you want to use both,
Right.
which you need to do some of the authoring anyway.
Right.
And then you would get a one license. And you could buy extra credits